Welcome to the Happy Mindset Show, the show that brings you insights, realizations, and lessons learned in order to help you to live a life you love. Today's episode is episode number 24, and today's episode title is Your Path Begins With You. So today I'm joined by Claire Ashman. So Claire is a 3 times TEDx speaker. She's a budding author, and she is an anti-cult campaigner. So today I have her on the show to talk about her own journey, because I think she's a great example of innate resilience, the power of curiosity, and independent thinking. So thank you for joining us today, Claire.
Thank you very much for having me, Dennis. I'm honoured to be here.
Cool. So yeah, Claire, where did it all begin for you, I guess?
Well, going back to the title of your podcast, Your Path Begins With You, is that I didn't realise I actually had a path of my own until the light bulb moment started happening for me when I was probably about 32, 33, and I'd already lived in the doomsday cult for quite a few years, and I'd had my 8th child and I had my 9th child in 2004, but it started. I had originally not wanted to live in that cult. I'd not wanted to move there, but my husband forced me to go. And so I had gone there already with the idea that, okay, I don't want to be here. Like, I didn't know what exactly I wanted per se. I didn't see my life. I hadn't planned it out or anything like that, but I didn't want to live there. And so I thought that being a good Catholic wife, if I just give up what I want for a little while, my then husband would, he would get sick of it and then want to leave. But then as the months grew into years and year upon year, nothing seemed to change, and he became more entrenched into the cult, and also he wasn't treating us well. And I began to become very uneasy inside of myself, and I was still very Catholic thinking. But what bugged me the most was the fact that, on one hand, my ex-husband and also the cult leaders were all saying, well, we have to all follow the rules of the Catholic Church. So the cult leaders were saying, we had to follow the rules of the Catholic Church. My own husband at the time was like, being ultra, saying a lot of prayers and fasting and all the rest of it. And on the outside, he was living the rules of the Catholic Church, so to speak. But then, within the family circle, he was gambling. He wasn't, he was emotionally and mentally abusive. And I just, you can't just, say one thing and do another. You're either totally into it or you're totally not, one or the other. You have to walk the talk. And he wasn't walking the talk. And so then I was thinking, well, why is it okay for him to be gambling away thousands of dollars in a day? But yet, I go and ask him for money for children's shoes and he doesn't have any, or he gets angry with me for asking. And I just thought, well, I don't know what life is like on the outside, like in the normal world, but it has to be better than this. And myself and my kids deserve to have a better life, whatever a better life is. And that started my path of, just one step at a time of, like looking from the outside in. I had no money. I had 8 children, and like we lived in a cult, and, I had no bank account or anything like that. Like, what kind of choices did I have? But for me, I found the choices within those boundaries, within those restrictions. And see, like, one of the first things I did to break the rules, so to speak, was we're all expected to go to church. They had a little chapel on that cult property, and we're all expected to attend mass and prayers there. And I just put my foot down one day and I just refused to go. That was it. Done. Dusted. And I literally got all of my 8 kids dressed and took them to church. It was on a Sunday, and took them to church in the local parish, despite being told that we would be publicly humiliated, we would be named and shamed, and we would not be welcome in any of the churches. And I found it to be quite the contrary. So that didn't take any money. It didn't take, I didn't have to shove it to anybody, so to speak. I literally just did it. I just made the plans, and I just did it quietly. Got all my kids up, just got them all dressed, and I just took them myself. And I just thought, well, come hell or high water, this is the first step.
How did that actually occur to you that you had no money? It didn't seem like you had any control. It didn't seem like you had any say in the matter. How did you know that was the right direction, that was the right first step for you?
The thing is, I didn't. That was the whole point. I just had reached a point where I was feeling fed up. And this is me speaking now, dissecting it. I felt rebellious, and I just thought, well, for so many years, the cult leaders had been telling us this about the outside people, have been telling it, about the outside parish, and also the outside world wasn't safe. I mean, every 6 months in that cult, we were basically told that the world was going to end. And then always, 6 months or whatever, or the date would come and go, still nothing happened. Again, date come and go, nothing happened. I mean, come on. After a while, it's like somebody crying wolf. And for me, I just reached a point where I just became rebellious, and I just thought it was almost like a testing thing, like, okay, I'll test the waters and see what happens. If they do name and shame me, well, yes, I will be embarrassed and humiliated, but hey, let's see what happens. And if I am named and shamed, well, I'll figure out something else after that.
Actually, when these end of the world events, when they didn't occur every 6 months, how did people keep believing in staying in that community? How come it wasn't this case of, well, the world didn't end, this must be untrue, we want to leave now? What's the mentality of that?
Well, the thing is that when it comes to sex and cults and control, whether it's controlling groups or controlling people or controlling a relationship, it's always about the outside manipulation and social conditioning. And that's what happens because, for instance, one of the things, when we first moved there, the comet Hale-Bopp was supposed to hit in the first week of June sometime of 1997. And so, we were told to prepare our houses with lots of tinned and dried food, water, clothes, and then we had to get black plastic and measure the insides of the windows so that we could put it up as soon as, the comet hit or, the earth started to shake or whatever. And then, of course, everybody was afraid because this was the real thing. It was really going to happen. But then, the date passed by and then we just kept on, and then it became the same thing all the time, whereas he would say, oh, well, I've received special secret messages from the Virgin Mary to say that, it's not quite the time, or human error messed up the date or misunderstood the date. I'm doing extra special, or there's certain people doing extra special sacrifices and prayers to hold back God's mighty hand. There was always a string of excuses, one after another, and it just started to really wear thin because for me, I'd reached a point where I've had enough. I was tired. I was mentally, emotionally, physically and spiritually just tired. I was just tired of always, I could never do enough prayers. I could never do enough sacrifices. I was never enough. And it just reaches a point where you just think, oh, well, I'm going to hell in a handbasket anyway. Why not help it along?
Yeah. And when you got to that stage, and did you find you tapped into a different energy that you didn't have before? Because when you're in that situation where you might feel like there's no hope anymore, I've often had I often thought that there's nothing more beyond that. It's like I'm just giving up and I'm a victim to my circumstance. That's the energy that's coming from. But what happened after that when you just kind of went, to hell with it, and what kind of changed in you?
Well, one thing that I discovered by accident is letting go of the attachment, because you can want something so bad and then it doesn't turn out the way you want and you're just left so disappointed. Now, for me, there was already people that had become disgruntled and left the cult property already. And I look back now and I still remember that intense disappointment. I was just like, why them and not me? Why? And, I did feel despondent and I felt sad and it felt like forever. And it felt like I was hanging out and hoping and having faith for so long. And it was like, when is it going to be my turn? And, I would feel that. So don't get me wrong. And even after I left the cult and, I was a solo mum of 8 kids. And there were times when I did go into my cupboard and just sit there and cry a little bit because everything just got overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. But for me, it was about letting those feelings out and then just, okay, what's next? What else can I do? Because one thing my dad did teach me, I see it more now, being more mature and looking back on things, because wisdom is great in hindsight. That Dad taught us a lot of resilience, because my family were actually quite very, very poor, and Dad was always looking for another way to make money. So there was always another way. And so for me in these circumstances, obviously I didn't put all these jigsaw puzzle pieces together at that time. It's only been since I was writing my book that I've, in reading it and putting everything down chronologically and seeing how all the jigsaw puzzle pieces have come together to form a picture, that I saw that, I would have those, not the highs, but, you have those resilience times, and then you dip down where you are low and you are depleted. But I don't know. I mean, I have Irish blood, so I don't know whether there's Irish stupidity, resilience. I don't know. But I just remember that it would always be, okay, there has to be another way. And for me, I didn't know. I didn't have the life experience. I didn't have the life knowledge or the world experience or world knowledge to be able to actually sit down and plan, think and plan anything out. I just didn't. I had none of that. So I literally just tried each avenue, because I figured that all those years just sitting there doing nothing and hoping and praying for a change clearly didn't work. And I'm an action person. So I just thought, okay, what is there left to do, And it wasn't helped by the fact that for years, for all of my marriage, my then husband had told me that I was useless at making decisions, because obviously the old-time Catholics taught that, men are the head of the house and women are too emotional and they can't make decisions. So I was always told that I couldn't make decisions. And then again, it was just like, well, I don't know what direction I'm going in. I've been told that I'm stupid all of my life. Well, I need to get out of here somehow or other. And I just, as I said, I'm an action person, so I just figured, okay, I'll take a step in this direction. If it doesn't work, well, then we'll just find another direction. I just thought there has to be a way out somewhere.
Do you remember asking yourself any questions at the time that led yourself on a trail of getting out?
Well, as I said in one of my, I think it was my last TEDx talk, I literally was like, how did I get here? Like what, and then it was, and see, the thing is that I didn't listen to my intuition. That was, when I go back and I think there were all these little signs along the way and the actual intuition. So I had all the answers inside, but I didn't even know to sit and listen and to actually have the confidence to follow that. And again, it's so easy for, if someone's already been doing this for a number of years or they're very in tune with themselves, it's very hard for them to sort of think about where I was coming from, because, years of, strict Catholic conditioning and indoctrination, and then the cult on top of that, you do forget who you are. You lose yourself. And I didn't even know who Claire was. I'd done no self-development or self-exploring or anything like that. I'd literally basically been homeschooled and, very isolated, very insular, indoctrinated and conditioned, and then got married, and then it just went on from there. So I had never, ever had a single life. I'd never, ever been on my own and literally just sat and asked myself questions. And so that's when I found that, I had let all these things go. When my ex-husband started gambling, I kept on, like I did say things to him, and then he would just push me away. But I didn't have the strength, or I didn't think it was my place to actually say to him, no, this is not acceptable anymore. It's, if you don't stop gambling, well, then I'm leaving. But I mean, I also felt fear because I couldn't take that leap because where could I go? I had no money. So I didn't, that way I knew I needed to have something I could step out onto, so to speak, because, I had 8 kids, for God's sake. You can't just say, well, I'm leaving you and you've literally got nothing.
So how did you end up leaving the cult? And when did you realize you were in the cult? Because this wasn't the first time you were in a setting where you're indoctrinated and conditioned. So it was a long time where you didn't know any different.
Well, see, firstly, when my ex-husband was first interested in moving to this group, I had never heard the term cult. I didn't know what it meant. Like, I never heard of it. It wasn't part of my vocabulary at all. I just felt like there was something wrong. I just felt really uneasy inside, and I just, it was almost like if you've ever had a stubborn goat and you put a collar around their neck, and if they don't want to go, they literally dig their all 4 feet in, and they are like a rock. They will not move. And that was almost like me. I just felt like I dug my heels in, and I did protest quite a lot and say to my husband that I didn't want to go. And he wanted to go, you see, and then I was forced to go. But the thing was that I didn't realise it was a cult until we'd been there 3 years. So it was the year 2000. No, it was after that, 2004, when I'd wanted to leave in 2000 when I found out what the cult leader was up to. He was a pedophile. But then in 2004, I read this book called The Beautiful Side of Evil, and I didn't even know what it was about. And I just liked the title, and I happened to be looking over my husband's shoulder when he was ordering books online, because this was a new thing back then, here in Australia anyway. And he got the book, and because it was from a Catholic bookstore or whatever, he humoured me and bought it. And when it came, I was like 6-7 months pregnant at the time with my last child, and I was so scared and fascinated. I read the whole thing in one fell swoop, and it was the true story of a satanic sacrificial cult in Mexico, I think. And it literally scared the living daylights out of me. I couldn't sleep. Like, now I know that's called an anxiety attack, but I didn't know that then. I literally didn't sleep for a week. I lay out on the couch, and every time I closed my eyes, I just felt like I was going to die, like I was going to choke to death. It was just awful. And the term cult was in that book. And although the cult that I was in was not satanic and it was not sacrificial, I could see the parallels. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I'm in a cult. I have to get out of here. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I have to get out of here. I have to get the kids and I out. So that's when I started looking for opportunities within the boundaries that I had.
Yeah. When was that opportunity? How did you when was the day you got out from the cult?
It was August 2006. And we were actually evicted from the property because it was a mortgage repossession. And because the cult leader a couple of years before had been arrested, he was ploughing money into his defence, into the court case. And so he stopped paying the mortgage. And we didn't know that at the time. Also, simultaneous to him not paying, the beginnings of him not paying the mortgage was that I was actually challenging them already by writing letters. So for the cult leader, it was like a backhanded, easy way of getting rid of a troublemaker by ploughing the money into his court case, knowing full well that eventually it would be repossessed. And so the thorn in his side, so to speak, would be taken away.
Okay. And so, like, when you got out from the cult, what was the most difficult part of adjusting to society after that? Because you had 8 children, you had no money starting off. How did you adjust?
Well, let's just say that the world smacked me in the face, because it was really hard, because and I was asked this just recently too. The thing was, I longed to be part of the world, but I didn't know how. And it was almost like the world had passed me by, and on a few levels, because everybody that was my age, so every man and woman that was my age had grown up in the 80s. So they knew the 80s music, they knew the 80s songs, they knew the 80s bands, they knew all the fashion, and they had wonderful memories of it, and I had none of that. The other thing was, I had 8 children, where most of the women that I met had at the very most 4. And the eldest of that 4 was either 10 or 12 years old, whereas mine was 16, 17 years old. So there was already this massive gap of, I already had teenagers, and these ones weren't even dealing with teenagers. They were dreading the teenage years, and blow me down, I had 4 teenagers at once and 4 in high school. That's enough to straighten you out pretty quick. But then it was just like, socially, I found it very difficult, because even when I did move out, I was still very Catholic in my thinking. So the way I was dressing was very old-fashioned, and it was very modest. And, basically, if you looked at me back then, people would wonder if I was not, an Amish person. And then also in my speech, in the fact that I didn't know much about the world around me, because especially, like politically or world events, or I knew who our Prime Minister is or whatever, but, like relevant political topics or anything like that, I just had no clue about, and I just found it really difficult to try and get my head around it. And then oftentimes, I would say yes, like if I was invited out, and like the school that the children went to was a Christian school, and the teachers were very, very helpful and supportive and understanding, and the kids were able to assimilate into school really well. But then the parents were very welcoming as well. And, I got invitations out to like a barbecue or something like that, and I'd say yes, but then I would be so full of anxiety in, okay, I don't really know these people, but it's very kind that they've asked me out. Like, what do I wear? What do women normally wear? Then I'd be thinking, okay, I've seen the ones that are, the lady that's invited me out, I've seen her dress like this and like that. Would that be appropriate? At that point, I wasn't wearing jeans or anything like that. So I'm just thinking, okay, so how can I best fit in the clothes that I've got or I'm wearing? It's just like, then there was the whole spiritual thing. Like, I'd spent my whole life going to church every single Sunday, because I was told it was a mortal sin if you don't, and the world's going to fall in on you, and it'll stop turning if you stop going to Mass. So I would be dressing all of my kids up and going to church, because that's what I'd always done all of my life. And then, from anybody looking from the outside in, I'm kneeling there with 8 of my kids all beside me, and all the girls and myself wearing scarves on our heads, the old-fashioned way, and thinking, you would probably think, well, she's a very pious girl and she's got all her kids and everything else. But on the inside, I was asking all these questions, in Mass they say, Lord, I am not worthy. Well, what, and I'd be thinking to myself, well, why am I not worthy? Why this? Why that? I was asking myself all these questions. I was just in turmoil inside. And then there was like, who's Claire? What does she believe? What does she think? Like one of my friends was, one girl that I became good friends with, she was an ICU nurse, and she was telling, obviously she would share stories about, one thing that you have to know is that when you go out with nurses, you hear all the horror stories about everything, and she told me about one of the ICU nurses that had gotten, fallen pregnant, and it was a bit later in life, and then she had the test and she realised, they found out that it was Down syndrome, so she aborted the baby. Now, my friend said to me that she personally couldn't abort, but she had nothing against her aborting because she could understand the decision. And see, when Kathy was telling me that, I was thinking in myself, what do I think about that? How do I feel about abortion? Because, I'd always been taught that it was a mortal sin, you never do it, whatever. But then, I was confronted with this and what Kathy was saying made sense to me. I felt no judgment for the lady who did have an abortion. But there was all these questions about, I had to ask myself all these questions and kind of work through them and then do reading and try and sort of fill the gaps a bit. There was a lot. There was a lot on many levels because at exactly the same time as I am trying to find out who Claire is and what she believes, I still was responsible for all of these kids. And I didn't want to screw any of them up by me just going off on some ridiculous tangent. So I would have to do a lot of thinking, and I kept a lot of this to myself because I didn't know how to share it with other people. And then, I didn't want to share it with my kids because they're still on the cusp of learning and questioning and all this too. And I wanted to try and keep them as free as I could. I didn't want to burden them with any of my sort of thoughts, and because they could be crazy. How did I know?
Yeah.
I was trying to leave them to be free to make their own choices and think their own things and not be burdened by anything that I might say.
So was that the first kind of period of really introspective questions you're going through, or did it happen before?
Not in regards to religion, it didn't. And then it was only about 18 months later that I divorced my first husband. But hey, the marriage was already on the rocks. So by the time we moved out, even though we moved out as a family, he went off and worked elsewhere. So we weren't divorced yet, but we were separated. And so I was on my own with the kids. And so it was just like, there was a lot of questioning in that time. It just went on, like the questioning. So some people have asked me, even in recent times, like, how long did it take you? And I'm like, I thought to myself, I don't know how long it takes because I've done a massive amount of questioning and learning, even in the last 12 months or 14 months, in finishing off my book, in writing all this, writing everything, especially writing about the last few years in the cult and then putting it in that chronological order. I was like, good heavens, how did I even have the balls to do that? And B, it was literally just one thing after another. Like no sooner did I start, taking my kids and going to church on the outside, then I was starting to pen letters and challenge the leader's authority. At the same time, my husband was saying to me, well, make sure the letters are only from you, not from me. And I thought, yeah, whatever. It's only now as I'm writing, he didn't have enough guts to even stand by me. He was ready to basically throw me under the bus and the kids too. So it was literally just one thing after another. And it has been only in the last 12, 15 months that I've really, even more had accelerated learning in understanding all of those choices and all those questions that I had.
So did you think it stemmed from you having the courage to make a decision, and after that you took action, didn't overthink it that much after that? You think that's what happened?
I suppose putting it like that, yes, because I didn't have very many resources really, because you think about, I didn't have, in those end years in the cult, I didn't have a mobile phone. Even though my husband had bought a PC, I didn't know how to work it. I had to get my kids to secretly teach me how to use, at least be able to email. And then it was literally just one thing after another. Because my ex-husband he was only away for a few days at a time because he was working about 3 hours away. So, there were small blocks of time. So I needed to do as much as I could in that time. And it was literally just doing what I could within that period of time. And And like I said, I am an action person, so I don't like sitting idle. I like to do something. So even if it may not be exactly the right direction or the right thing to do, I just feel like doing something is better than just sitting there and hoping and praying.
Yeah. So how did you get to the TED stage? And like, how did you start getting to the core of your actual message that could help people? And how did you actually go to TED after that?
Well, when I first moved out of the cult, I was too embarrassed and humiliated to actually share any of my story. Like, there was a few parishioners in the local Catholic parish that knew where I'd come from and they were being helpful. But to the other extended wider world, I tried to avoid saying where I was from because I felt so bad about it, even though it wasn't my fault. And so then I shared a little bit of my story, and then it was like, and then people became a little bit more interested, and then they suggested that I write a book. And I didn't think that my story was really just book worthy, really. And then I started writing, and then I was still living in New South Wales then, which is where the cult is. So I was still living in the town because the cult was just outside of a small town. And it wasn't until I moved up here 5 years ago to Brisbane where it's amazing, because again, I can see how social conditioning, like when you're in such a small town, because it was only about 30,000 people and it was low socioeconomic, and I found that people weren't very forward thinking. They weren't very open, not open thinkers, not entrepreneurial or anything like that. And I found that once I moved here to Brisbane, which is a bigger city, I only knew 2 people when I came here, and I really liked that because I threw myself into meeting various people, and I found that they were much more open. I attracted much more open thinkers. And for me, because we're very close to the city, we're only 20 kilometres out of the city, I wanted to take part in, living in a city. And so one of those things was I actually was flicking through Facebook one day and I saw this TEDx event and it intrigued me. So I asked them whether I could be a volunteer, and they said, no, we don't do volunteering, like this particular one in Brisbane. And they said, well, it's too late now anyway, you can apply for next year. So then, some months later, I noticed that you could apply to be in the audience of their next event, which I did do. And then when you get accepted, they ask a question on the bottom of the email, do you have an idea worth sharing? And I had ventured a little bit into sharing some of my story with people that I'd met here in Brisbane. And you had to write your idea worth sharing in 100 words, and then they chose the best 10 to do a 1-minute pitch. And at that time I was an Uber driver here in Brisbane, and they rung me up while I was driving one day, and she said, we can't choose you for a 1-minute pitch because your story's too big, but do you want to talk later in the year at one of our smaller events? And I said, can I scream now? Because I would love to. And then on the inside, I'm thinking, holy crap, I need some help here, because I don't know how to do this, but I want to talk, but I don't know how to do it. And then at that point, I was a part of like a worldwide ladies group, from an entrepreneurial group. And so I told this little story, I was so excited, and I told this little story in the group one day, and this lady said, you need to contact Sinette Stevens. And I'd never heard of her, obviously. So I thought, let's Google. So we Google and get on to yourspeakingjourney.com. And she had a 7-day, I don't know whether she's still got it, but she had a 7-day initial free little course. And she was opening up, she was having the first beta of Step on the Red Dot. And she said, if you can, and so the deal was that you had to finish this 7-day course, and then maybe you would be chosen for the Step on the Red Dot. And me being of a competitive nature, I'm like, oh my God, I just want to get in. I have to finish, so I want to get in. I was hoping I would be chosen. And she chose me. And so we had that initial group, and there was a few of us, a few of the same ones that have gone on to do TEDx talks. And we had a ball. And the beta, I think, was supposed to last for about 6 weeks, but ended up by lasting for about 8 or 10, I think. But in that third week, like, she'd given us homework to do, like, find explore the TEDx events that, in your city or your area or your country, whatever, that you could possibly attend or would like to attend, like their pages, sign up to their email and, contribute in a valuable way. Don't just like things haphazardly. And so one of them, which is a university here in Queensland, the University of Queensland, which is here in Brisbane, biggest campus, and they had a Facebook status that said, this was on Monday, mind you. On Wednesday, we're having a step on the red dot on the grassy knoll. Anybody that wants to pitch their story for 2 minutes, we're looking for speakers for our upcoming event in July, I think it was. So this was February. And so I messaged Sinesse and I went, oh, my God, do you think I can do this? She goes, yes, of course you can. And so then we nutted out. We had a chat over Skype and nutted out, fleshed out a bit of an outline. And I went there and I was shaking at the knees and all the rest of it, thinking, how can I do this? And I did it. And then I found out later that they chose me on that day. But I didn't realise that they didn't tell me that until later. But at the same time, Sinesse said to me, you have to own your story. And see, that was something that I hadn't done. I hadn't owned my story. And she said, one of the things is if you're going to be a TEDx speaker or any kind of speaker at all, you've got to be talking. You've got to talk to people. And I thought, oh, my God. Like at that time, because I was an Uber driver, I was meeting, upwards of 50 people a week. And I'm thinking, well, people are going to think I'm freaking crazy. I'm a crazy person if I start saying I come from a cult. Mm. And she said, but you have to own your story. This was a Friday. And so I was driving that night and I thought, okay, I will share my story. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I ended up by, but how I did it was obviously, as an Uber driver, they always say, oh, hi, how are you? How long have you been doing this for? Is this the only thing you do? And I would go, no, I'm actually doing a TEDx talk really soon, and then you just go on from there. I didn't spill the whole story out. But there was many times where it was like, oh, my God, my friend's daughter so-and-so has been in a cult. Oh, you're doing great work. This is fabulous. And then there was many times where I'd actually stop at the destination and it'd be like, keep telling us more. We want to hear more. Yeah, just keep the meter running. We want to hear more. Keep going. And it ended up, by the time I did my first TEDx talk, I had already Ubered about 6 of the audience members in weeks beforehand. Yeah. So it was really good. And see, I actually became much more confident in sharing my story and the questions that people asked. And then I found much more, and it was so good.
So owning your story, does that entail sharing it and practicing sharing it and is that how you own your story? Like, especially when you say if somebody has a story and they've got like fear and shame and guilt around it, and that's what's stopping them from talking in the first place. Is it a matter of practicing this, of getting over that initial fear, sharing that story and sharing and sharing and sharing? Is that how you own the story, or what does it mean to you?
I think well, for me, it was about, because when I look back, I was telling the story like in a non-emotional, sort of like from a distance.
Yeah. How did you get that distance? Or like, how did you get that distance? Like,
how did I get? Well, I got that distance by just being closed off, because I also realised that being part of the cult and being so like strict, and because the way I was brought up when I was, very strictly Catholic was also, I see it now, I didn't know that then obviously, was to almost have no emotion. Like, you can feel happy, but your happiness is based on the state of grace, or when did you last go to confession, or how many prayers you've said, or how many sacrifices, you know what I mean? There was a conditional happiness. And there's obviously also the guilt and the judgment if you done something bad. So, but then those years in the cult, I discovered, and it was only after I thawed out, I had become numb. So I was just like living on autopilot. I wasn't actually living, like really living and enjoying life. There was nothing to enjoy. And so when I spoke about my story, it was just very matter of fact. That's just the way it was. Look, I did this, that, and that. And then somebody say, what did you do next? I just did this, this, and this. It was just very dry, chronological, and just matter of fact. Because by the same token, so even my husband said to me the other night, he goes, why do you ask so many questions? I said to me, it's almost like my brain has just come alive in the last 5 years, especially, in that I just ask so many questions, and I have a huge and intense curiosity about people's brains. Like, why do they think that way? Why do they believe that? Why do they act like that? Why do they react like that? What has happened in their past? Oh my God. I said to my husband jokingly that I married him as an ongoing psychological experiment. He doesn't appreciate it.
But what have you actually, what I'm kind of curious of too is, what have you learned from your sharing your story about the questions that people ask you? Have you learned a lot about human nature from just simply the questions people ask you about your story?
I have, because it's just like, because people have asked me questions. They're like, oh, but what happened here? What happened there? What did you think? How did this happen? And, sometimes I've been gobsmacked by people's questions because I haven't known how to answer them, because at the time that I was acting, on my journey and taking these steps, I didn't think, because I didn't know how. It's only in retrospect I've been able to understand my own actions and my own thoughts at that time and able to explain them now. So I've learned a lot about myself. And again, I've learned how to forgive myself as well for being in that situation, because I felt a great deal of guilt and shame for especially having my kids there. Because I was thinking, I was thinking, God, I didn't give them a really great start. And and I felt like I'd sort of, they're on the back foot, and I've apologised to especially my older ones a few times. And they're like, you don't need to apologise, Mum. We were all in it together and you just didn't know any better. And look, you ended up by getting us evicted, and look at the life that we have now. And it took a long time for me to do that and to actually own my story. And then, as I mentioned before, especially in the last probably 6 to 8 months, when I've been writing about the last years that I spent in the cult, and writing out all those events that happened, and that I, the different steps that I took and different actions. And then, I can see the patterns now. I can see the patterns of, mental and emotional abuse and the social conditioning and everything like that. And then trying to put, my then husband trying to keep me restricted. But I mean, it got to a point where it was a bit like an octopus in a string bag, because there was just all these holes and I was just finding these different holes and getting out. So in the end, he couldn't contain me. So it was just like, she's going to hell. I thought, oh, great, cool.
From talking to you, it doesn't seem like you have a lot of actual regret of going through all this. How do you view about this? Yeah. But now it seems like you come out the other side. And do you feel like you've lived a complete life up until now?
A complete life? Well, no, I felt, look, it was only probably between 18 months, 2 years after I got evicted from the cult, and I felt intense anger and resentment, because I thought, towards my ex-husband and towards the cult, because I thought, damn, I gave I never had a single life, and I gave the best years of my life to basically an asshole and, to the cult. And I just thought, because I couldn't be single no matter how hard I tried. I got 8 kids. There's no such thing as a single life. And I felt angry and resentful. And then, and it was hard. And I just thought, well, I've still got to bring up all these kids, because their father was not involved at all. He chose not to be. So I was on my own. And I just thought, this is unfair. It is totally unfair. And But then at that time, I'd gone back to taking piano lessons, and the piano teacher was actually a lot older than me, a lady, and she was a lot older than me. And she was only just starting to ask the questions. So I was like 38 at this time, and she was like 50 or 51. And she was only just starting to ask the questions of herself that I'd already started asking in a vague way when I was 32. And she'd had her children late, so her kids were younger than mine. Some of them were younger than mine. And I looked at her one day and I thought, holy hell. By the time she's figured this out, she's going to be damn well near 60 years old or older. And look at me, I'm not 40 yet. So thank God for that. And that's really what jolted me. And I thought, okay, I'm a young mum. My eldest is 18 at that point. I thought, right, I will just do, because I had no plans on having any more kids, obviously. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to live my life the best way I can with my kids. That's what I'm going to do. And believe me, I've still had regrets at times because it's been hard, because I still think, I didn't get to do a lot of the things that my peers did. But the fact is, I had one grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was not a favourite amongst my siblings and I, because she felt that life had dealt her, an unfair blow, and she was basically wandering around life with not just a chip on her shoulder, but two damn big logs on there. And she used to moan and bitch and complain about everything, from the weather to we didn't visit her enough, or we visited her too much, or something. There was always something, there was always something wrong. But then on the other hand, my paternal grandmother, who was my favourite, she used to always say, there is someone always worse off than yourself, Claire. And she always had this sunny disposition, and I found that I would gravitated more towards her, and I am actually more like her. And I just figured, yes, I have had an unusual life, but for me, I believe that it's happened for a reason. And in sharing my story, I want to make a difference. So for me, my story is not just about me. It's about sharing my story to help other women who are stuck and who, we don't see. Because there are other women out there, the hidden women that are part of these groups, or they're in a cult-like relationship or a cult-like friendship, and they're lost and nobody sees them. Like the world might see the person, but they don't actually see what's really going on inside. And I just think that if I just thank the universe every day that I'm not broken, because there's been some women who have contacted me and they've said, we're broken from our experience. And that makes me sad, because, it just means that they're hurting in their brokenness and they can't enjoy life. And if I have been given that gift of resilience where I am not broken, and I can make a difference in this world, because ultimately, I have 5 daughters. And to me, I wanted my daughters to grow up wild and free and independent and creative. And to have, to be able to dress, have their own fashion, to be able to speak their voice without shame, and, do what they want. That's what I wanted my daughters. And so in being able to change the world for my daughters, I want that to be a ripple effect for all women, and especially those ones that are stuck in any sort of controlling group or cult or relationship or whatever it might be.
How important do you think it is for a person to feel like they've been heard by another person?
Oh, look, that's the most valuable thing. It's like Maya Angelou says, it's not what you did, it's how you made that person feel. And that person feels valuable when you listen to them, when you can actually listen to their story and help them not to feel so alone, and to be a support to them. And that's just the biggest thing. And again, my paternal grandmother comes to mind, and I so wish she was alive still. But, Mary McAuliffe was always known as someone who you could go to for a cup of tea and a talk. And I think, again, I have gotten that gift from her where, I will drink tea or coffee and sit down and have a talk. And I love it when I speak to women and I see their faces light up and they're like, wow, I really can do this. And, I really do have a choice. Life isn't that bad. Thank you. You've helped me so much. And I love that.
Do you have a favorite book there?
Pardon?
Or do you have a favorite book?
Oh, favorite book. Oh. Why do you ask me this question? Because I've got so many favorites.
Yeah, it's hard.
The thing is, I love reading autobiographies, but then I like having sort of lighter reading, so to speak. Recently, I've been reading Richard Branson, and I like him because he's very just down to earth and just easy to read and very personable. I have read Pamela Stephenson. She is the wife of Billy Connolly, the Scottish comedian, and she wrote an autobiography called The Varnished Untruth. And
what did you learn from that?
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Well, she actually became a psychologist, and many people criticised her for becoming a psychologist because they thought that she was just trying to be, like a celebrity psychologist, but she actually said she did it for herself. And the way she wrote her autobiography was the questioning is like from a psychologist's point of view. So if you're sitting in a psychologist's office, then she answers it as herself, her real self. And I found it very, very inspiring, actually. Because she was born in New Zealand but brought up here in Australia, in Sydney. And because I had felt actually very, very socially backward and like I'd missed out on a lot of things. But there were some things that she spoke about in her autobiography that I could relate to. So I thought, oh, wow, well, I'm not hugely, so even though she lived in the world and was part of the world and had a so-called normal background, which I didn't, there were still gaps in her life knowledge as well. So I found that very fascinating. I like reading entrepreneurial books as well, like The 1 Minute Millionaire, The 4-Hour Work Week. I have all these, and now I'm just starting to study. I'm doing my first single study uni course on new religious movements, sects and cults. Okay. So I'm reading books along those lines as well. So I have a wide genre, really. I'll pick up anything, and if it holds my interest, I keep reading it. If not, I ditch it. Yeah,
would you dabble in and out of books? What's your reading style like?
I usually have 3 or 4 at a time on the go.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a bad thing. I've started kind of doing that too. I think I've heard somebody say actually recently that you don't have to stick with a book. You can dabble in and out of it. And if another book catches your attention, there's something for you to learn over there, go there. Because I've heard as a reader before, I thought you needed to finish one book and stick with it and be loyal to it. And
that's too boring. Boring. Another one that I read was Thrive by Arianna Huffington. That's a really good book. I really liked that too. Yeah.
What does she talk about in that?
She actually, look, you might think that it's just a woman's book, so to speak, but she had a light bulb moment when she fell in her office and hurt herself. Like she actually cracked open her face from hitting it on the side of the desk. And they didn't know what was the cause of it until it was actually, they found out after a lot of tests that it was sheer exhaustion. She hadn't been sleeping, and very much anyway, because she kept on thinking that because she's an entrepreneur, it's going to be like a hamster on a wheel all the time, do this, do that, and all the rest of it. And so that was a real enlightenment. But she doesn't just talk about that. She talks about having a better life. It's an awesome book. Like she talks about volunteering. She talks about being strict around your sleep, doing things that are good for you, like your so I know now that I'm not so weird because I like my bed. I do like my bed at a certain time, and I like my sleep, and I don't care what anybody says. I'm not a night owl, and that's it. Even the kids know that. If they make noise after 9 p.m, they're out on the lawn. Not literally, but I do tell them that. Just like, but that was a really good book because she talks about having because she had a Greek mother, and she said there were so many lessons that her mother taught her when she was younger. She didn't realise it until she was older. But there was a lot of that, from a lot of the Greek philosophers and stuff, little gems.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I really liked it. I really, really liked it. I've lent it out to a friend, and when I get it back, I'm going to read it again. So, like, that's another thing. I get attached to certain books, and I make sure I keep them and I read them again.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I guess my last question is, what does happiness mean for you now?
Happiness for me means having choices, because I didn't, obviously, before I left the cult, I didn't realise that I had so many choices. I thought that life had to be lived in a rigid form. And now it's like, well, if I don't like that, I can change it. How can I change it? Mm-hmm. What are the pros and cons of changing it? And I just feel like I've shed so much of that Catholic guilt and judgment. As my editor says, that Catholic guilt creeps up on you. It's the gift that keeps on giving when you don't want it to. And it's so true. I told her off this morning, actually, for that, because she was telling me about something that was making her feel guilty. I said, seriously, you weren't brought up as strict as I am, and you're worrying about Catholic guilt? Get over it. If I can, you can. But it's about having the freedom. I'm not bound by these strict, rigid rules and thinking, going through the 10 Commandments or some rules of the church before I do something because, I could commit a sin here. Now it's just like, well, does this make me happy? Does it or it doesn't? It's that simple. And, one of the biggest things when I moved up here, as soon as I crossed the border from New South Wales to Queensland, I did a massive delete and block on Facebook, because there was just some people that I just, they weren't encouraging of my entrepreneurial journey. They weren't encouraging of my vision. And I just weren't going to have those people in my life. And then because I was in such a small town, it's very hard if you run into them, let me tell you. It's embarrassing and hard. So, and once I came up here to Brisbane, because, we've got a bigger city, I'm just like, well, I meet quite a few people, but if I don't click, I listen to my gut, and if I don't click with them, mm-hmm. and I don't want this to sound judgy or very picky or anything like that, but let's face it, not everybody's going to like me. I'm not going to like everybody. It's that simple. It's and it's nothing against them, nothing against me. But if we don't get on, or I feel that they're a bit melancholic, or they're just about life, well, that's okay. I wish them well and move on. We don't have to be friends. But I've found that I've got such an eclectic, enthusiastic bunch of women around me now, that are very supportive and entrepreneurial and helpful. And it's awesome. Like, it really is awesome to have that. And I think that is a really important thing as well, is that you must always have friends. It doesn't mean you have to have a massive group. And like I tell my kids, it's got to be quality over quantity. And have those friends that are your best friends, that are your mates, that will either, they're happy to sit in front of the fire with you and have a good yarn, or they want to go out, or they will explore entrepreneurial ideas with you. They'll tell you if an idea is crap. Yeah. They will. They've got to be able to. You've got to be able to accept that. Just I have mad ideas, and I say, tell me, do you think they're crazy? Yeah, you're crazy. Okay. Cool. We'll
it saves time. Like there's an art to delivering that too. When you know that somebody's got your best interest at heart, it's easier to take that stuff on board, and that just saves you time in the long run too, instead of wasting your time following an idea that's not going to work.
Well, I think it's true, and you have to be. I tell all of my kids, especially my daughters, I said, look, you need to be honest with me. If I'm walking out and I look ridiculous, do not tell me to my face that I look beautiful, and then I walk out and I'm laughed at somebody, whether my makeup might be aged, like it might be the wrong colour for the era or whatever. I said, you better tell me, and I've said to them, you tell me. If I look fat in that, you tell me. Don't you just go, oh, yeah, lovely. No, I don't want to hear that. And I've said to my husband too, if you think I look ugly in that thing, tell me. I'm not going to, I'd rather have my loved ones be honest with me and my friends be honest with me and just say, look, that was a dumb idea. That was a stupid thing you did or whatever. I'd rather that straight to my face than people go, oh, no, that's lovely. No, because I don't want to look like an idiot because you told me it was great.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy, right?
Well, it is.
Yeah. So how would somebody contact you, Claire, find out more about you if they're interested in knowing more about you?
Well, I can go to my website, which is www.claireashman.com, or I've got a public Facebook page, which is Claire Frances Ashman, so they can just find me on there. They're mainly the two that I use. I do have Instagram, which is Classy 70s Girl, but I don't do the Twitter thing because otherwise you just have too many social medias and you're just on there all the time, and I don't have time for that. I just, I'm very much a face-to-face girl, and so when people contact me, I like to talk to them on the phone or over Skype or Zoom or something. I'm just a down-to-earth face-to-face girl.
Cool. Thanks for the conversation, Claire. It was very interesting, the journey you've gone on, and to see the person you are today, and you've come out the other side and you're thriving. So I think it's an inspiration for anybody who might feel a bit stuck right now. So thanks,
well,
Claire.
Thank you. Look, if I can help anybody, with my story, I'm very happy to.
Perfect. Cool. So until next time, have fun and enjoy the process.